Welcome to the Data Coffee Break podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Christian.
If you are passionate about data like us, take a seat, relax, and join us to our coffee break where we discuss all things data.
And remember, there are no filters, no PR.
It's just a real life experience. So let's begin. I can definitely see that we all here, the three of us, wearing big hoodies. So it's cold in the UK, it's cold in the Netherlands as well. Christian, how are you doing today?
We are freezing here in the UK. At the time of recording, we are at -5 degrees. A hoodie is needed, and of course, a nice cup of coffee to have our podcast today.
One of our colleagues sent an article, more fake news websites. Official fake news website is more like joke website, where it said like London is basically isolated because of the cold specifically that we have. Usually it's different. Usually it's north of England and the UK, which is colder, and it's just here, London alone. We are trying to cope here. Anyway, so who do we have here today?
You were talking about fake news. So today we are super excited because we have a journalist turned into an information designer, data analyst, and Tableau specialist with 10 plus years experience as a journalist for multiple news outlets across Brazil and Europe. She moved into a Tableau and Alteryx consultant and sales engineer for the World Food Program, the Information Lab, and Tableau. She has lived in multiple countries doing what she loves, including Brazil, Netherlands, among others in Europe. She holds a degree in multimedia journalism from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid. She's also a dedicated cyclist, a great friend. With us, we have Rachel Costa.
Welcome, Rachel.
Welcome.
Thank you both. And it's a pleasure here with you too, representing the Netherlands/Brazil/ I don't know how many countries I can represent in my life.
And I would definitely say that you are a polyglot. So you speak Portuguese, you speak Spanish, you speak English, and you speak Dutch. Am I correct?
Yeah, not count Dutch, but the other three, it's possible to count. Dutch is an attempt. It's a work in progress. My plan is to take at least 10 years to learn something. But yeah, it sounds like an achievable target, 10 years to learn Dutch. Not to be fluent, just to learn the basics. Right?
Just to be clear. Be a huge respect for that. To know all of those languages and be able to switch between all of those, That is a big skill.
It looks easier from the outside than from the inside.
From the inside?
My brain is just very confused.
Actually, Rachel, can you tell us a bit more about your journey between journalism and the data?
How I ended up in data. I was in journalism for a while. Journalism is one of those professions that was quite affected by, funnily enough, by technology, right? The change in technology, the way that we started to consume news in the past years changed a lot, and it affected a lot the market in journalism. I used to work in a magazine, those writing in those things that we used to buy, printed. It nowadays sounds kind of something from the other century, but yeah, it was 10 years ago. So I noticed that the market was changing a lot in journalism, and especially for printed news. That was where I was at that time. And I started to see, I was like, okay, I don't see several years on this career in front of me. And at the same time, I was 30 years old. So the option to retire wasn't an option, unfortunately. Otherwise, I could retire at 32. As it wasn't possible, I thought, I think that I need to find other way. And I started a bit to research things and areas that I could see myself. At this point in journalism, data journalism was becoming quite trending. We were starting to talk a lot about it, about using data in journalism. And it was funny because that was when I started to see and to kind of get more interested in data, because I always had a bit of frustration, because in journalism, if you go to journalism, if you ask around, usually everyone will tell you that they hate maths and they don't like spreadsheets and this type of stuff. I always liked this part, but we don't use it a lot in journalism. So when I saw this thing around data journalism, I was like, oh, finally, journalism that you can also use other types of knowledge. That's interesting. And yeah, so that was how I started to get into data. And then, funnily enough, nowadays I'm just with the data part, right? Because since 2012, I don't work for newsrooms anymore. So I left the newsrooms behind and became full-time data person.
Do you know why it became trendy, data journalism?
I think that a lot because of conditions in a way, because investigative journalism always existed. But then when we start to get now the past 20, 30 years, what we started to have is an easier way to gather data and process data. And that's for everyone, including newsrooms. So then we started to have those projects where you would see journalists getting into a lot of data and trying to understand what was behind. So, for instance, Panama Papers is an example, right? Because it was a leak of information, huge amount of data that needed to be processed. And those things, if you think about it, like 50 years ago, it wouldn't be possible. First of all, because we wouldn't have this type of leak, right? This information leak that we had with Panama Papers. And also because you wouldn't have the ways to store and analyze those things. So it's a bit of, I guess that as everything else, it's a bit of result of the technologies that we have nowadays, the
Correct. Yeah.
huge amount of data that we have nowadays, and everything involving the data part.
Okay. And do you see a lot of people when it comes to data journalism that people were considered as just journalists and just did this kind of side move to learn more about data, did some potentially specific trainings around it to become more data journalist professional, or those are actually more data people who are becoming journalists, the other way around?
It's funny because I think that you have more people from data that were absorbed by the team in the newsrooms. So if you go, for instance, to the big media outlets and see how they work in those data journalism projects that they do, usually they have a bit of a multifunction team. So they will have someone that is strictly from data. Usually they have people that were already in those companies, but far from working in the newsroom. So, for instance, they would already work in the database of the Guardian. Let's say I'm citing the Guardian here as a fictional example because I'm not sure who is doing this part there anymore. But they would, in a lot of cases, what they did is get someone that was already involved in data in the company, and then he started to work with this person together with the team of journalists. And of course, now that we've been seeing data journalism projects for longer, now we start to see more hybrid profiles. So journalists that touch a little bit of code and understand a little bit of data, or people that came from other backgrounds and understood and nowadays understand well about journalism. But the very beginning was really people with very different profiles and careers that started to work together without having the knowledge of each other.
I think that's really interesting. And with your experience as a solution engineer pre-sales, can you take us to the process of collecting and cleaning data when you are as a journalist? And I'm talking about here in the sense of, is it really different from how organizations in your experience do it? As a journalist, is even more crucial, this cleaning and collecting data, because the risk of misinforming, the impact that it could have is also quite big, right?
I think that in both cases, right? Because within an organization also, if you don't take care of your reports and the numbers that you're showing, you can really cause trouble. You really need to pay attention in what you're doing. Yeah. And I think that the process is the process to everyone, because it's a bit of the same, because what you will do is basically collect data, make sure that you have what you need, especially in journalism. You really need to have something in the end of the day, right? It's something like, I cannot write about nothing. You need to have something. If there isn't, and that's the part that I guess that it's different from when you're in the company, because in the company, those are your numbers. and some companies, they will kind of create some numbers just to show in the end of the day, but let's say that it's not right. It's not the best.
I hope that's not metrics like for the investors that they create.
But in journalism, you wouldn't create your own KPIs. What happens in journalism is that if you have a source and your source is not giving you anything, you need to move out and find something else. So I guess that's the main difference here, because when you're talking about journalism, it's really, you need to find something that will be what you'll be reporting in the end of the day. So if the first thing that you get your hands on is bad, it's not interesting, you move on and try a second one. And usually the other thing is that you're dealing with information that is really spread everywhere. So you need to check things outside of where you found it usually. I think that's the point where it's really different, because in journalism you'll be cross-checking information all the time to make sure that those things are trustworthy and everything. Meanwhile, while you're in the company, you have your data source, you have your source that are already ready, and you will not be really going out a lot or cross-checking it a lot. But after this, I guess that what comes after, it's the same for everyone. That is, then you have this bunch of data that necessarily won't be in the right format or won't be cleanest data possible. So you need to really start to work on it and shape the data to understand what you have.
What I find interesting and quite exciting actually for journalism, but also for anyone analyzing data, is how much information we can find as what we can call open data, like provided by governments. So very easily known and well known that financial newspapers are like leveraging all this like data coming from governments. As you say, it's quite interesting in journalism. Like you can report on this one, but there is the aspect, obviously, of can you trust this data, or can you investigate if this data is being reported correctly? There is obviously well-known cases of journals unveiling like all the data has been manipulated by governments or by some organizations. So that's obviously a huge kudo for journalists who are doing this incredible work and always questioning the truth, even on the data which is provided by many organizations and many public institutions around the world.
Especially checking. It's not because data is official that it's good, right? Governments are sometimes unfamous for doing strange things. And I have an example from Brazil that during COVID, suddenly our government decided to discontinue the count of people with COVID in the country. So we had in Brazil a coalition by civil society that they decided then to keep counting, because basically in the federal level, what they did is they shut down the counting. So they stopped putting together the data from the different states. And then you imagine the country the size of Brazil. Brazil have 26 states, 200 million, more than 200 million people. And then suddenly the government that should be putting it all together decides that, oh yes, by the way, we will not be counting it because we don't think that it's necessary. So official figures, they are important, but I think that sometimes the absence of official figures are even more important than the official figures itself. Because in journalism, right, if you don't find any number about something, it's also the lead that there is a lead to something going wrong.
And there is something to find behind, yeah, definitely. When with Christian, we discussed about the idea of data journalism as a topic for the podcast. The very first thing that came to my mind are data visuals we see on journals. And I, in particular, became very aware of what is data journalism with those visuals during COVID, because everyone became aware of what is flattening the curve. Everyone saw those charts reporting on COVID numbers and seeing the trends across time. So that's quite that was my perspective around what is data journalism. And from what you already described, this is obviously much, much more than that. You were speaking about the Panama paper, for example, and there are many other cases. The interesting thing is the storytelling that can be brought between the visual and the article. I don't know if you have any interesting stories or experience around that.
You mentioned COVID. There was one very interesting representation during COVID. It was, if I'm not mistaken, it was El País. What they did was a bit on the masks, and that was interesting because that was quite visual. There is data behind, of course, but it's not big data, as for instance, when we were talking about Panama Papers. What they did was they created a visual representation of the impact of the masks. So how it really changed. And then what they did was they would show different situations. So for instance, a classroom, what happens if you have 40 students there and the teacher talking and the teacher is without a mask? How COVID would spread among everyone? And that was an image. Then they would show, you'd see the people, how many would get COVID after 1 hour, how many would get COVID after 3 hours, and then the same thing if they are all with the mask or only if the teacher was with the mask. So it was a really visual way to understand what everyone was talking about at this period. That was the importance of wearing a mask, how it would affect the transmission of COVID. And this was pretty interesting because I think that sometimes in journalism, we usually joke, especially because we work a lot with photographs since always, that images are worth a lot of words sometimes, right? And that was a clear case for this because then you had instead of writing a full text telling people that you should wear a mask because you reduce the amount of the chance of spreading the disease by X percentage, whatever. They just showed the thing like, okay, this is the image of what happens. So look, and then understand what the impact is, what all those researchers are talking about, and why they're telling, hey, let's wear a mask, everyone, because then we'll have less spread of the disease. So yeah, I think that it's powerful when you offer another way to people to understand and think about what you're saying instead of words.
Quick one. If you're enjoying this episode and our show, please make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Links on the description as per usual.
Also, if you'd like to grow this community with us, think about sharing this episode with a friend or a colleague interested about all things data.
Now, back to the episode.
In a more kind of a funny note, it was an event about data visualization. And then we had one of the ladies that she was presenting during COVID. She did a visualization in her kitchen that was amazing. So she started to quantify the amount of days where she would be responsible for the food at home. She lives with her partner, and the amount of days that he would do it. And she did it in the tile in the kitchen. She basically created a little code where one color was her days, the other color was him. One sign would be when they're cooking, and the other one when they would be ordering food. And then she kept it for a few days. And it was super funny because then when you would see the tile, because her presentation was a photo of the tile that she did during the COVID. And then it was like, you wouldn't need to do any. First thing that you would see is like her color was predominant during the full thing. And she was like, yeah, we talk a lot about better balance between male and female and everything that we're changing. But when we look at our house and we do the count, the thing's not even happening. You know? And it was super funny because I was like, oh, that's a very effective and easy visualization, right? And that anyone can have a tile, anyone has a tile in the kitchen and can do their own quantification of the thing. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Simple and visual, definitely. I do remember a book called All to Lie with Statistics by Darrell Huff. And there is obviously I have in mind some examples of visualizations where the way you color this visualization, the way you use the type of chart, the way you orient the chart, etc., is going to tell a different story. And that's the magic and what is actually scaring about data and journalism in this case. Do you have any pretty interesting example on that extent, and maybe all for people to be able to debunk those ones, to be able to be aware and fact check in some aspect?
I think that in journalism, the main thing there are two things, my favorite things in journalism. Number one is add up the percentages if it's a pie chart.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of pie
Definitely.
charts around that magically they add up more than 100. If it's a pie chart and if it's adding up more than 100%, there is something wrong.
Definitely.
Pie charts are not aimed to.
Pie chart is 360 degrees equal 100%. Yes.
Exactly. If your pie chart is like, if you add up the percentages and then suddenly you have kind of 165, it's okay. when it ends the pie, it should be 100. And the other one is the axis, right? Axis. Check the axis, because it's also, and coming from journalism, I know that sometimes you need to it's journalism, right? People will read what is unusual. In journalism, there is one thing that we say, that is, for instance, if a dog bites a human, no one cares. If a human bites a dog, everyone will stop and read about it, right? So usually we will write about the unusual in journalism. So what a lot of people do in data, that then it's very bad practice, is to make the thing more unusual, they just kind of do this tricky thing with the axis, that is, instead of starting in zero, we will start in whatever number that is more interesting. So the gap between the bars gets bigger. This gap that would be 2 points that no one would see, suddenly you can really see the gap,
Yeah.
because you put your axis starting at 49. So yeah, that's the other one in journalism that I think that people should be very aware. Check the axis to really see if the difference that you're seeing represented is a big difference, or if it's just a visual effect that they're creating there.
You're right. There is plenty of bad tricks that not only journalists are using to skew the perception, not specifically to report bad numbers, but to skew the perception maybe of the audience in this case.
Yeah, and that goes back to the data literacy. I want to be fair sometimes to people that are producing those graphs. Sometimes the visualization tool that they're using is the way that it's being auto-generated, if you want. So yeah, I think it's really important for everyone listening to the podcast to always review your axis, and even if you're using a visualization tool, check that those axes goes to zero. and talking about data visualization, for all of our listeners out there, if you're a Tableau user and you had access to the dashboard starters that come with Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud, I think it's called now, and you use any of those dashboard starters like the Salesforce one, ServiceNow one, Rachel was the one behind the creation of all of those.
Correct.
Dashboards,
Yes.
right? And those visualizations really, really tell a story, right? When you get your data into it. For our audience of sales engineer, sales consultant, data analyst, can you take us through the process that you usually do for creating those stories with dashboards, in terms of and how it matches with your journalism experience?
Sure, especially with the dashboard starters. Now they are called accelerators.
Okay. My bad.
But yeah, I worked on it when it was dashboard. No, it was not even dashboard starters. It was quick starters, something like
Quick
that.
start. Yeah.
The early name of everything. The idea was to create a bit of a starting point for people not used to do data analysis, right? So we have the classic Tableau user that knows how to do drag and drop and manage the tool well. And the idea was, okay, if we have those users that are not used to drag and drop, how can we get them a first experience? something for them to at least start see things. So what we had was a bit those technologies that are identified. So we worked with Salesforce, Marketo, Eloqua. That if you think about it, it's quite similar to when we're working in journalism. Because, for instance, within journalism, I worked in big media outlets. Those that are basically, it's very difficult to put an audience on it because it can be anyone. It can be me, it can be my grandmother, it can be my neighbor, it can be the CEO of a company. So it's very diverse. But as a journalist, you can also work with a very specific audience. For instance, there was a time that I worked covering health and then in a very, very, very specialized way. And what is in common between those two situations is that you need to adapt. You talk to the person that you're aiming to reach. That was what we were doing with the dashboard starters. That was a bit trying to imagine who we were targeting, and then from there building the product around it. I don't know if it's because I come from communication. For me to develop anything, if I don't have an idea around who I'm trying to reach, it's very difficult for me to develop something. I need to have an idea around, okay, I'm trying to do this for this type of user / audience / profile. So I can plan mentally what I would like to communicate, what are the things that I think that are important and everything.
Yeah, it's fantastic to obviously adapt to the right audience, always in this case.
For our audience out there, they would like to go into data journalism. What do you recommend to them? Do you have any best practices based on your experience? What if someone would like to get started?
Yeah, there is a lot of initiatives around in data journalism that is Flourish. Flourish was created by two guys from The Guardian that can remember like probably 2012 or something like this. They decided to create a visualization tool. If people would like to see it, if you search for Flourish online, you see that the tool is still there. It became quite popular in journalism a bit because of the history of it coming from two guys that are basically working in newsroom. Tableau is used by some newspapers also, especially the ones that keep things for everyone, because then they can use Tableau Public as their platform. So we do have, for instance, La Nación in Argentina. They are a big user of Tableau. In Italy now, Correo della Sera, yeah. They are also a big user of Tableau Public. And of course, D3 is quite popular also. But I will be very honest, I tried also to learn D3 and I didn't have the patience to progress. So I can tell people how amazing it is. I see that the things are pretty beautiful. People that are good at D3, they can really create pretty beautiful things at D3, using D3.
Is D3 used a lot when you want to have like interactive visualization? For example, I read frequently Le Monde in France, and they have sometimes those articles where when you scroll, you see the data coming up to the screen and it's kind of animated.
Scrollytelling.
Scrollytelling?
Yeah, scrollytelling is the name of the effect that you create, that when you scroll down, you see the things moving up.
Yeah. Is it using D3 or potentially other technologies? Or?
No, then you have two things, because to create the scrollytelling effect, then it's one thing, and the other thing is the visualization running in. So they're independent of each other. But nowadays, there are some tricky things, because in the past, you would need to really do JS with something combined to do scrollytelling. But nowadays, you have like those things that mock scrollytelling. There is one media, I think that everyone here will know, that is the Pudding. All the articles that you see at the Pudding, they will have data as their source of the news. They created a bullshit AI that would give you, it would analyze your Spotify. getting what are your top artists, and then they would kind of do a bit of a funny analysis in which type of profile you have and whatever. I think that it's still there because I saw it not a long time ago. But in general, everything that I've seen so far from the Putin, it's really amazing. They go on serious topics, but they also go on non-serious topics. Everything using data. What helps a bit to break this thing, because I don't know you too, but I have a lot of friends that they're not from the data world, that they look at me and then they put already this target of Ned on my front just because I work with data. And I'm like, come on, data's cool.
We will put it on the description, pudding.cool.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all those insights. So now to conclude, and we ask this question to every single guest in this podcast. So what will be the single most important professional piece of advice you ever received? We put you on the spot today.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's only one, right?
It can be a 2 parts.
So try things. I guess that's the main one. I would say try things, different things. Especially me, that I changed career, countries. I don't know. I changed everything that you can change already. So I like to think that trying things is good. As I said in the beginning, when I mentioned that I'm trying to learn Dutch, not necessarily you will succeed when you're trying. But yeah, just try. Even if you don't succeed, you will learn something. You will get things from it, even if it doesn't go as you planned it before.
I can relate to that as well. Trying things. I think everyone on this episode, we all change countries or trying different things, come from different backgrounds. So if you're listening to this podcast, try things. I think it's a great advice. Thank you very much, Rachel, for your time. Where people can follow your work? I mean, we know that you are quite an advocate for Data Plus Woman. Mark and I believe that is an episode on itself. So we hope you come back for another episode, but where people can follow you.
There was a time where I used it to be on Twitter. But I'm still there, but let's say that I'm not very active. So nowadays, I'm on LinkedIn and trying to find a place to be. So if everyone has a cool place to be replacing Twitter, let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn. For those of you that are in the Netherlands, but not only, because we've been organizing our events now, always including a hybrid setup so everyone can follow up. In February, in the date that we don't have yet, we're organizing our first event of the Tableau user group plus Data Plus Women of 2023. We don't know where yet, but it's coming. For more info, people can follow our page. Go to Tableau user groups. There is the 2 chapters, Data Plus Women and the Tableau user group Netherlands. And from there, you can be informed of everything.
Amazing. Thank you very much again, Rachel. I think that was fantastic. And we will see everyone next week. Thanks for listening to this episode. This podcast represents our views and not the ones of our employers.
Our mission at the Data Coffee Break podcast is to inform you and help you grow in this always changing data field.
Follow us and get into the conversation with the community on our LinkedIn page and Instagram.
See you next Tuesday, and until then, keep your data caffeinated.